What's up, everybody? It's your host Sebastian Fonseca of Spectator Sports, back with you again with another episode 63. And before we get into today's episode, please do me a massive favor, like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Take a look at our Instagram and TikTok pages. And for my Spotify listeners, give us a 5-star review. It makes a massive difference. All links are in the description. Football is here. Sort of. With NFL training camp starting up in the last couple of weeks, it's good to see that teams are getting ready for the 2023 NFL season. Training camp is where you get to see guys who don't really get a lot of playing time. They fight for those last few spots on the roster, and then you also get guys who are jostling for position just to be a starter. Notably, you get to see teams like the New York Jets who get featured on Hard Knocks. The Jets have made a ton of moves, notably bringing in Aaron Rodgers from the Green Bay Packers, and I mean, this catapults them to amongst the AFC's elite. We know how great their defense was last year with Sauce Gardner, but now with Aaron Rodgers there to pair with a competent quarterback to feed guys like Garrett Wilson, who was Offensive Rookie of the Year, paired with Sauce Gardner, the Defensive Rookie of the Year. It's gonna be a really interesting year for the New York Jets. I mean, right now with Aaron Rodgers taking a pay cut already, it just shows how invested he is with the New York Jets. They are a team that is hungry. They fought for him. They wanted him from a very early point in the NFL offseason, and this is just something that we haven't seen out of Aaron Rodgers for the last few years, because in those last 2-3 years, despite contract extensions with the Green Bay Packers, you could tell that the relationship was souring, right? When they drafted Jordan Love, it just seemed like Aaron Rodgers did a lot of things out of spite. He won 2 MVPs out of spite, and he lit up the entire NFL with great regular season after regular season, but he fell short in the playoffs. I mean, a lot of these came at home, and last season with the chance to get into the playoffs again at home at Lambeau Field, the Packers fell short. But now he gets to reset, hopefully change his legacy perhaps, and bring the New York Jets a Super Bowl for the first time in over 50 years. And with this pay cut that he's done, it's opened up about $35 million in cap room. And we're already hearing rumors that Dalvin Cook could be joining the New York Jets. And this is going to help a ton with the Jets backfield, because Breece Hall, their standout rookie last year, suffered an ACL injury last October. So this means that he doesn't have to rush back from that injury, and they can have a veteran who's been there, done that for several years with the Minnesota Vikings, and it's a good pairing. I mean, he's capable of catching balls out of the backfield. He's hungry for probably maybe a short-term 1-year prove-it deal, and then that can catapult him to some long-term financial security. But either way, this Jets team is going to be super exciting to watch, and it's just a matter of can they contend with the Bills and the Miami Dolphins and sneak into the playoffs this upcoming season, the first time since 2009. Heading down to South Beach, with the Miami Dolphins having a rude awakening to their training camp. Unfortunately, their newly acquired cornerback Jaylen Ramsey suffered a meniscus injury that's going to keep him out until December, and this is a huge blow to the secondary, who desperately needed a guy like Jaylen Ramsey to shore that up, because with Xavier Howard aging into a guy that is no longer an elite cornerback, still a pretty good cornerback, but it's a significant drop off to what he used to be maybe 2-3 seasons ago. With this injury, they brought in Eli Apple, the talkative, very annoying cornerback that we've seen he get under teammate Tyreek Hill's nerves when they used to go up against each other. When Eli Apple was with the Cincinnati Bengals, Tyreek Hill was playing for the Kansas City Chiefs. Eli Apple certainly runs his mouth, but he has some experience in the NFL, and hopefully with Jaylen Ramsey potentially coming back in December, this helps out Miami. But for right now, they're going to have to rely on Xavier Howard, also that front line as well. And with Jaylen Ramsey not being available up until December, it certainly brings in some issues for the Miami defense, but they'll have to rely on this offense that is going to be centered around Tua, obviously. Tua has had issues with staying healthy. I would love him to be able to survive a 17-game season with a minimum playing / starting 14 to 15 games. I think the biggest thing is just overcoming this concussion suspension stuff, but also just other injuries as well. I think that's something that we need to see out of Tua coming into the season, because with this offense, the pairing of Jaylen Waddle and Tyreek Hill, I mean, that is probably the fastest duo that you'll ever see in the NFL. I have some concerns with their offensive line and their tight end depth. I think right now on paper, with everything going on in Miami, they certainly should be a playoff team. Probably the scariest news to start off NFL training camp came out of Cincinnati, with Joe Burrow going out of the pocket on a routine rollout play. It seemed that when he had his calf fully extended, it pulled up on him. He started hobbling on his left foot, and the right foot, he just could not put any weight on that. And you're thinking, it's an Achilles, season over. Bengals are done before the season even begins. But thankfully, scans came back saying that it's a calf strain. It's probably going to keep him out up until the season opener, that is in the second week of September. But this is the best case scenario for the Cincinnati Bengals, because without Joe Burrow, I mean, come on, this is basically next to nothing that they can really do. Offensively, their whole thing relies on Joe Burrow and his availability to orchestrate the offense, get the ball out to their talented receiving trio, plus also featuring Joe Mixon out of the backfield. So thankfully, it's not a serious injury, but calf injuries are certainly tricky. Remember, like any other athlete, they rely on calves to explode, make cuts, and just be able to change pace in terms of running. So definitely have to be delicate in the rehab process. Don't push it too much. But this is going to be the second consecutive training camp where Joe Burrow is going to miss significant time, because last year he had a lot of time that he missed due to an emergency appendectomy. Building chemistry starting off is definitely going to help, because they're always going to have issues with this offensive line. They haven't made a ton of tweaks from last year to this offseason, but certainly best case scenario for the Cincinnati Bengals is that he will be available probably by the time the season starts in September. Over the last 2 seasons, the Philadelphia Eagles have made a ton of moves related to the University of Georgia. Last year, they took 2 major pieces from the championship defense in Jordan Davis and Nakobe Dean. And this year, they went back into that same well and took 3 other members and traded for DeAndre Swift. This year, their first round draft pick, Jaylen Carter, who they picked up at number 9 overall when he was supposed to probably go as the top overall pick, but off-field issues made teams a little bit wary of taking him at such a high value pick. So he fell to the Eagles at 9, and it's been a match made in heaven. I mean, the Eagles invest heavily in the trenches between the offensive line and the defensive line, and they already have a bunch of veterans in tow on both sides of the ball. This year, as soon as Jaylen Carter was able to get into practice, he was going to veterans and saying, what can he do? How can he get better? And the veterans have been teaching him any type of tricks or giving him as much advice as possible. And it's translated to a lot of great reps so far and early on in the Eagles training camp. We've heard that he's been able to wreck a couple of blocking schemes, whether it's breaking down double teams or just being so explosive up the middle that he's even been able to sack Jalen Hurts. If he's been able to do this on a consistent basis, I think he'd be the odds-in favorite to be Defensive Rookie of the Year. We know that he has all the tools from an explosive year with the University of Georgia, and it's just a matter of how much playing time he can get, because the Eagles' defensive line is pretty stacked. But I think he's going to be slated in to be a starter alongside future Hall of Famer Fletcher Cox, and then he'll be rotating in based on down and distance. But in those pass rushing situations, you're going to see a lot of Jaylen Carter. His teammate Nolan Smith has been making great first impressions as well. I mean, with the bend and his speed has been so hard to guard. He's been obliterating a lot of blocking schemes that are going around the edge, and I'm sure that the Eagles under new defensive coordinator Sean Desai will be utilizing him in a lot of pass rushing situations. And then with Keely Ringo already being slated to being the heir apparent as the future outside corner of the Eagles defense whenever the cornerbacks Darius Slay and James Bradbury decided to hang it up. This team is very much loaded. I mean, the Eagles defensive line have veterans like Brandon Graham, and I already mentioned Fletcher Cox, and additionally you have Hassan Reddick, who's been phenomenal coming off the edge. So I'm sure with all these veterans, they're going to keep showing these younger Georgia Bulldogs a lot of new tricks, and this collection of talent is going to make the Eagles defensive line so dangerous moving forward. Justin Herbert has signed a mega deal worth 5 years, $262.5 million, and what this means is that the LA Chargers and Justin Herbert are set together for the next 5 years plus whatever is left on his rookie deal. This obviously breaks the highest paid contract that Jalen Hurts set that was later broken by Lamar Jackson, and this is just a testament to what Justin Herbert has done in his very young career. He hopped onto the scene in week 2 of the 2020 season, went head to head with Patrick Mahomes and sent the game into overtime, and that was really impressive for a professional debut, looking at the defending champion, arguably the best player at that time, if not the best player currently in his own division, in your first ever regular season start. And he's played unafraid. I mean, he's put up a ton of great stats. He's set records for rookies, and he's set records for just the amount of passing yards, passing touchdowns in just a 3-year career so far. I think he's a great regular season quarterback, but we need to see more in these bigger games. That's not entirely his fault. I think it's just surrounded by Chargers ineptitude, Chargers mistakes, and also Chargers injuries. They've just been such an injury-bitten team. I mean, Mike Williams gets banged up, or there's just something to do with clock mismanagement. Whatever the case may be, I mean, it's just been some type of misstep to derail a promising career that's already started out with Justin Herbert. But certainly he's been great, and I think the Chargers are definitely poised to make another run into the playoffs. It's definitely a very competitive division in the AFC West, but I certainly think that they're second place behind the Kansas City Chiefs. Over the weekend, Jonathan Taylor and the Indianapolis Colts failed to get a long-term deal negotiated, and with Jonathan Taylor heading into the last year of his 4-year deal, he's set to be making $4.3 million, but obviously, as any other running back wants, they want that long-term security. But right now, the Colts have all the leverage. With the recent way the market has been shifting towards the owners and them being able to pay running backs on the cheap recently, it's becoming very problematic for running backs, and Jonathan Taylor is the latest victim of this issue. We know that he's been an NFL rushing champ. 2 years ago, he led the league at 1,800 rushing yards and 18 rushing touchdowns, but he was a little bit banged up last year, and this is the leverage that the Colts are using to not give him a long-term deal. And honestly, even if he has a good year this season, I'm sure that they're going to end up franchise tagging him for the next season, and they can do it again in 2025. Owner Jim Irsay understands he has the leverage, and he flexed his muscles a couple times over the weekend. The first quote was about how they're not going to trade Jonathan Taylor now or even at October's deadline later this year. And as Jim Irsay doubled down, he talked about how if he were to pass away and Jonathan Taylor wouldn't be able to get the contract that he wanted, the NFL is just going to keep on moving forward, and it is a privilege to be part of the NFL. Yeah, I understand that the way the market has been working out, that running backs have become rather expendable, but I think the quote itself is just something that a lot of people just haven't been so blatantly or bluntly open about, which is the unfortunate reality for running backs. And I frankly find this a little bit disrespectful, because running backs like Jonathan Taylor have worked their butt off from the start. I mean, they've had to put their bodies through hell just to make it into college and go even further to make it to the NFL. As soon as he's eligible for a big deal to maybe make some generational wealth for his family, this is when the owners who, like Jim Irsay, have unfortunately been able to block that. And Jim Irsay, to talk about privilege, I find is rather amusing because, well, he inherited the Colts from his rich daddy, so I think in terms of privilege, he should look at himself himself in the mirror rather than blaming Jonathan Taylor, but that's an issue for another day. It's a tough situation many backs are facing these days, but as I mentioned, the owners are going to manipulate and continue this trend as long as the market and the CBA allow. Jaylen Brown breaks the $300 million barrier as he signs a 5-year, $304 million contract extension. Obviously, this becomes the richest ever NBA deal. It takes in a lot of headlines because of how his play has been, especially in that Miami series. We know that his ability to handle the ball and also just be a pretty good passer and his shot selection have been visible holes in Jaylen Brown's game. He came out as a pretty raw prospect out of Cal, and he was known to be kind of that 3-and-D player, pretty good length, and has all the tools to be a pretty decent defender. He made all defensive second team this year, which is pretty good. And it was a career season for Jaylen Brown. So timing, it all lined up for him because with the current CBA, he became eligible for the Supermax deal. And I think statistically, at least in the regular season, certainly earned it. But we can't not gloss over these holes. Jaylen Brown's inability to dribble left has been a big time gag amongst NBA fan bases, and we've seen that it's been a huge weakness in his game. Miami highlighted that and then really got to see that under a microscope in Game 7 when the Boston Celtics had a chance to respond after being down 0-3. Just too many times Jaylen Brown had the chance to assert himself, especially with Jason Tatum hurt early on in that Game 7, but there was just too many times he just fell short. And I think the biggest thing also is shot selection. Taking good shots is something that Jaylen Brown needs to do. He takes way too many threes for my liking, so that's something I would like to see him adjust. If Jaylen Brown is a guy that's making $300 million on this deal, it's a really good question to ask. What is Jason Tatum's value? Because he's been far more the most talented player on the Boston Celtics. He's been their go-to guy since about 2020 after Kyrie left. I don't know what exactly his worth would be. I think in that neighborhood of 350 wouldn't be an odd number to give to him, but with the new TV money that's coming into the NBA in the next few seasons, this contract may not look as bad as it does right now. At this moment, I'm certainly calling out the Celtics in overpaying Jaylen Brown for this contract extension. So that's it for this episode of Spectator Sports. Thank you so much for tuning in, always greatly appreciated. Take a look at our Instagram and TikTok pages, and for the audio from this podcast, you can find that in Spotify. All links are in the description, and I'll catch you on the next one.